Yo, this is episode 3 of the To the Throne podcast. Welcome. I am Dakota Kingrea.
This is Dan Santana.
Dan Santana, there he is. So we just want to remind you, if you haven't already, to like and subscribe. That'll keep you updated on everything we got going on. So a lot in the works, a lot coming up. So yeah, stay tuned. But today, we felt like it was put on our heart to talk about isolation. So it's been a trend in some of the conversations that we've had recently, and some guys sort of brought up as a topic for, what we've been walking through. And so we just want to talk about a little bit of that, especially coming out of the world isolation of the 2020 pandemic. I mean, so, we've walked through isolation inside of that isolation.
Isolation inception.
Isolation inception.
Right.
So, the world was isolated because of COVID-19. Screw you, COVID. And then we were even further isolated because of, different things that we've been walking through. And so, just we want to start that off, I guess. What does isolation look like because of 2020? And what does it look like now, I guess? What do you think?
Man, what's interesting about isolation is that we've all actually gone through it together.
Yeah.
It's been one of those unifying things, too, where you realize, okay, I'm not the only one. But how interesting is it that in 2020, there's probably been a million conversations about this, right?
Yeah.
But how interesting that in 2020, we go through isolation together, but yet we still feel like we're alone.
Oh, yeah, wow.
And, so even the fact that we went through what we went through as the world.
Yeah, the entire world.
Right. We could talk about our country, too, just in our country, in our state, in our city, how we're isolated and literally can't or aren't supposed to see people.
Yeah.
And, it feels like it's illegal to actually see somebody, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But how we went through that, and yet we can still go through that.
Still feel alone.
Again, right? And so I moved here at the end of 2018, and out of a tough season, didn't move here how I would want it to.
Yeah.
But I will say that I moved here on how God wanted me to.
Yeah.
It was His timing, and I just know that He takes us through things for tests.
Yeah.
And so it's not am I going to live or die test, right?
Yeah.
But it's a test to move on to the next stage, the next level of my life, right? And so coming here, there was that adrenaline initially when you move, right? And you've gone through it as well.
Yeah.
There's excitement, there's new, but you're also like having to set up your life.
Right.
You're also having to
restart
everything. Social media, like all these things kind of get restarted, right? You're restarting your life, your friendships, all of that,
everything.
Jobs, whatever
church,
it is, right?
Everything.
And so, but there's that excitement, but also like, yes, there's a practical thing you have to do. You have to work at it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like when you get injured and you're playing a sport, right? You get injured, you're playing a sport, you can still run on it, whatever. But once you stop for a minute, once you sit down and then you try to get up again, you realize, wait a second, I'm actually
my
hurt.
leg's broke.
I'm injured.
Yeah.
And so there's that time needed to heal.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe that isolation is, from the Lord in the sense of how we have gone through it.
Yeah.
I believe that, you can isolate yourself in the presence of God. We talked about that kind of.
It's not always a bad thing.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily isolation, because isolation is really you're pulling yourself away from everybody.
Right. Yeah.
And we talked about in episode 2 about how what I love about Jesus is He often withdrew to meet with the Father.
Yes.
And so in ways He put Himself in isolation away from people, but He was with the Father. He wasn't trying to escape and be by Himself. He wasn't Adam in the garden.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's not isolation when you're alone with the Father's relationship.
That's it. And so it's not isolation in that way, right?
Yes.
So, but we walked through isolation, and I did through this season of going through what I went through with the family, new life, new house, new city,
everything.
New church, keep going, right? New everything. And then coming here and realizing, okay, I need some time, and didn't jump right into community right away. That kind of thing really got isolated, and that actually happened for the entirety of 2019.
Yeah.
So this is pre-pandemic isolation.
Double isolation.
Right. But let's even talk about that. Like going through 2019, that was a really rough year
Yeah.
for myself and my family. Just getting acclimated and adjusted, and really trusting the Lord. Okay, God, this is hard. This is tough, but this is what you called me to do.
Yeah.
And there was isolation in that moment. And I remember talking to you about it. And I remember talking to multiple people about David. We often go to David because we love his life, and he was a man after God's own heart. So that's kind of what we aspire to be. But David went through seasons of isolation.
Yeah.
And some of that isolation was for him to survive. Right? It was he's in a cave.
Yeah.
And I felt like God even said that we were in a cave.
Yeah.
But a cave could be for a couple things. You can use a cave for a couple things. And back in the day, it could be for protection.
Yeah.
Or it could be for survival and for hiding.
For hiding, to hide.
And God just reassured me that this is a place of protection for you.
Yeah.
And so it may look like isolation if I'm not invited into this place.
Yeah. Mm.
And so when we say go to the throne, what we're talking about is inviting God into our places of isolation, because exactly what you said, it turns from isolation into relationship.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that even when you get injured, when you get hurt, you go to the hospital and they isolate you to heal up, right?
Yeah.
But they isolate you from the outside world so that you don't get infected.
Yeah.
But they don't leave you alone.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we have to struggle with, is that we go through isolation, but our isolation can be lonely. We can actually be alone in our isolation.
Yeah.
And that's not what God intended.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because that's maybe human nature to run away from things and even people and isolate ourselves. So we went through 2019 and I felt super isolated, but I also felt protected. Yeah. And I knew God was doing something. I was being healed. I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
I was isolated from the world, if you will, but I wasn't alone. So, and then we move into 2020. And here's the interesting part about just my story is that my story came before your story. Mm-hmm. My hardship came before your hardship. Yeah. 2020, even in the fact that we were isolated from the world, was an amazing year for me.
Wow. That's incredible.
And it was, I think it was an amazing year for a lot of people. And it's tough to say that sometimes because people went
so
through...
many people went through hard stuff.
hell, right? People lost their jobs. And I mean, it's so many things that has happened. People lost family members.
People died.
And you realize, it was impactful for a lot of people. And I also believe, on a side note, that God's grace was there through it all. And God, he's sovereign. He knew this wasn't a surprise, right? Yeah. And so, but for us, and after walking through a 2019 that was just tough, right? It was just tough in every way that you can think it was tough. 2020, we started seeing the light. Wow. And we actually came out of the cave of isolation. Wow. Into a cave of the world being in isolation. Yeah, right. But what's funny is that some of the most free people in the world are in prison. Wow. And I can see that in the Bible, even that's been something that
Paul.
Yeah, that you can be in a prison but yet be free. Yes. And you invite the power and the presence into that prison, right? And I mean, angels can walk in and unlock the doors, and things can shake off. Yes. And so we basically walked into freedom, into a prison of the world. Wow. But it was I felt like 2020, even the fact that we were isolated and how tough that was, there was a lot of joy. Yeah. There was a lot of and it's not all like financial or job related church related, even though all that was better. Yeah. But it was a sense that we're healed, we're moving forward, protected. Right? And so even going through that, I think that's probably a story that some people probably can relate to of 2020, because I've heard some stories. Yeah. 2020 being such a freeing time for people. Yeah. Such it was tough for a lot of people, but it was also a lot of freedom came out of 2020.
I got both.
Yes, you got both ends. Yeah.
It
was a long year for you.
Yeah.
But you did get to experience a lot of that. And so 2020 for us, and again, this is our story. This is my kind of experience through it. We came out of this cave and went into another cave, but we were free. Yeah. And God protected us through this whole time. Wow. Right. And I think one thing about isolation is that, and what God doesn't intend for isolation is to remove you from his presence.
Yeah.
And it may remove you from the presence of people,
Yes.
which again, community is important. God has established it. And even in his word, it says where 2 or 3 are gathered, he's there.
Yeah.
He thrives in community.
Yeah.
His presence is in community.
Yeah.
But we always have to have community with him first.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that should be the priority in our life. And I learned through 2020 that it was a reset.
Yeah.
And that was a word that God even had for us. Like it was a reset year. It was like God was doing something new. And to remind us that, community and all that things, as valuable as that is, relationship with him is the thing.
Yes. That's so
because you may go from community to community in life. You may go through seasons of jobs, and you may go through seasons of, even financial success and financial ruin, if you will, right? Ups and downs in life.
Yeah.
But your relationship can remain with him.
Going to the throne.
Yes. You go to the throne. You keep your relationship with him, and he'll see you through those times. And one thing about 2020 that has encouraged me is that I believe that it's reestablished what the value in community for people.
Yeah.
But I hope it also has reestablished the value of community with our Father.
Yeah.
And that going to the throne, especially when you have no choice.
Yeah. It's
all you have to go to the throne.
Yeah. It's either that or Netflix.
Yeah. And let's be honest, Netflix.
How much value you're actually getting.
Yeah. It's we all know, we all love it.
Yeah.
But we also know it's just like
what
sugar in our life,
yeah.
right? It's amazing, but it's not always good for us, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing that's always good for us is the Word of God. One thing that's always good for us is the presence of God. And it's interesting that in life, we tend to remove what's good for us in seasons. I know that's one thing that I've struggled with in the past. Like, people, what do? You know that the healthy things in your life that you should be doing, you tend to not do when you are struggling.
Them. Yeah.
But that's actually the time when you should be leaning into some of these things, right?
Yeah.
And it's just human nature to like put yourself in isolation, even to the good things in life that are healthy for you. I mean, just basic stuff, eating right, exercise, all those basic things that we know that are beneficial for our life.
Yeah.
When we go through things, we shy away from that. We turn away from that. We forget about that, and we go to comfort. And there's no greater comfort in this world than the comfort we find in His presence.
True. It's really,
But how quickly we forget.
Oh yeah.
That when we struggle and we go through things, we look for earthly.
We want the self-soothe thing.
We look for things that aren't that are temporary comfort.
Yeah.
Instead for the eternal. So 2019, 2020, it's really taught me a lot. You know what it's taught me? It's taught me that if you put your faith in God for your life, and no matter what the world's burning, right? It was crazy.
Yeah.
It's pretty nuts. Like we've lived through some crazy stuff over the past couple of years. When you think about the things that we've seen, that, like you wouldn't even imagine in the United States, but yet we've lived through it. And especially where we're at right now, at the recording of this podcast in Nashville, Tennessee, things are almost like normal.
Yes.
Like
basically,
we're back to normal. Even we were at a restaurant and like family restaurant, and there's been the QR code thing or the paper. There's actually real.
No way. You got a real menu?
There's a real menu. You can touch it. So that's what's crazy. Now I was like,
I still haven't got a real menu.
Well, one day. But this is where we're at now, where we realize how 2020 was like the longest year.
Yes.
Of many of our lives.
Oh yeah.
And it's interesting that even right now, 2021 has flown by kind of.
I can't
just because we have actually been living life and doing things.
Yes.
So that kind of shows you that not that going through life quickly is a thing, right? But when you go through isolation, it makes the time that so much longer.
Yeah.
It just you feel like you're in it forever.
Well, there's more to think about. There's more to ponder on. I think
to dwell on.
I think sometimes I think sometimes isolation can become an echo chamber if you let it.
Yeah.
And it can be you and your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And that just makes for a bad, that's just like, it magnifies everything.
Yeah.
It makes everything louder. It makes everything, more, the thing about isolation, I think, too, is when you get when you become isolated and you start to focus on things that maybe you wouldn't have focused on without isolation,
Right.
that it can sort of sometimes become like a mirage,
Mm.
and it can distort reality a lot of times. And I think that that's the value that I hope that is coming back to community, is realizing that in community you can find your true self,
Right.
and in isolation, it can become so distorted
Mm-hmm.
because it you go back to how important it is to be with the Father, and the opportunity isolation gave us to be with the Father.
Right.
Now, some of us didn't necessarily choose to be with the Father during isolation.
Right.
Some
We
people
chose comfort, or
some
we
people
chose.
just did not choose to lean in, and because but it was so necessary. And I think if we don't do that, isolation can actually distort our reality.
Right.
Our insecurities can get magnified.
Right.
Our anxiety can get magnified. That's why you see people who are like so scared to go back to work, because everything is magnified for them.
Yeah.
Everything in their life is magnified, and they've forgotten what it is truly like to live life in community
Mhm.
and in the world, and with risk, and with all these things and it's because, isolation will either make or break you.
Yeah.
And it is a magnifier. And so you can either look at yourself, or you can look at the Father and
That's
say,
it. And what are you going to magnify in your life?
exactly.
What are you going to
Yes.
make bigger in your life?
Yeah.
Isolation makes your problems bigger.
Yes.
It just does. It makes
Straight
the world's
up.
problems bigger.
Yeah.
And relationship with the Father makes him the biggest thing.
Yes.
And you realize,
Makes everything smaller.
yeah, and it literally dwarfs and blocks it to where it almost
Yeah.
doesn't. You realize how much
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Especially as Christians, this is something that we believe that we are not a body with a spirit, but we're a spirit in a body.
Yes.
And so what that means is that this is a temporary life
Yes.
for us.
Yeah.
Now we're supposed to steward it, and God has a plan for us. This isn't for no
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Or else we just do nothing with
Do
our life
whatever.
and prance in a field somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And then die and go to heaven and live.
Go somewhere.
Yeah. But no, we have a purpose. God
Yeah.
has actually put us on this life, right?
Yeah.
And so, but we're a spirit, and we're to be led by the Spirit, and we're to live in a place where we see things through the eyes of that way, and not
Yeah.
through the flesh. And easily,
Yeah.
we can go towards what our body feels.
Yes.
And that's
Immediate comfort.
what the comfort. So what do? We go in hard times. We go for body
Yes.
comfort.
Yeah. Soothing.
Yes, and oftentimes that troubles our spirit.
Yeah.
It doesn't line up. Like
true.
our physical comfort doesn't all line up with
Yeah.
our spiritual comfort,
Yes.
because we're not.
They're different.
They're different. That's the DNA of each, right?
Yeah.
Are different, and so our spirit is made to be in community with the Father,
Yeah.
and with
And others.
others, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes us come alive. And I would say that the people who live the best lives, the most fruitful lives,
Yeah.
are people who have strong community in their life.
Yeah.
And people who travel.
Yeah.
I believe that's a thing. That's like one of those
Yes.
scientific facts that
You see more things.
you see more things, but you
Yeah.
see more community. You have
Yes.
a more of appreciation
Yeah.
for life. And if you live in a place where maybe things are rusty and broken, or whatever the case is, and
Yeah.
that's your only experience,
Yes.
it's your life is grim.
Yeah.
And then especially with social media, where you're open to the world, but yet you're more isolated.
Yeah.
And that's been the struggle too of
Yeah.
I can see so much, but I'm also now even more withdrawn.
Yes.
And that withdrawing is because you want to live that life. You want to see it, but you can't. So you
Yeah.
feel like, I just have to put myself into a safe place here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And because I don't want to feel
Well,
those things.
It's
And-
such. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I just feel like with the traveling thing,
Yeah.
not everyone's able to travel,
Right.
and we get that, right?
Yeah.
But it's more about community. It's more about, getting into a place.
Mm-hmm.
What when you were a kid, right? What's the best things to do? What are your favorite things to do?
Play with your friends.
Play, yeah. You get around, travel, go on a
Yeah.
vacation, go down the street, play with your friends at the pool,
Yeah.
whatever it
Do
is.
stuff.
Yes, it's community, right? With other people and seeing other things, experiencing other things, right? We get older and
You do
we
less
start
of that.
losing
Yeah.
that, right? And you do less of that, and you isolate more, and it just seems like the older people get, the less friends they have.
Yeah.
And sometimes the less places they'll go,
Yeah.
right? It just depends on their life. And I think that community is the key to living a happy life.
Yeah.
And community is the opposite of isolation.
Yeah.
So when we live in isolation, it literally cuts off
Yeah.
that lifeline for us. And it may be uncomfortable. Some people aren't as outgoing,
Mhm.
right? And it's just a reality
It's
of
harder for some people.
Yeah, it's harder to be around big crowds. What's interesting about community is it doesn't require you being at the biggest crowds, the
No.
biggest parties, the biggest concerts,
Yeah.
or whatever it's going to be. It just requires you to be with other
Yes.
people and live your life with other people,
Yeah.
whether it's 2 or 3 people, whatever it
To
is.
walk with people.
Yes. And so that community is so important. I think that's what was robbed from us in 2020.
Yeah.
Was the ability. Now we had family, right? And we don't want to undervalue that at all.
Right.
Your story looks different
Oh yeah.
because you had family, but
Yeah.
what happened?
Not anymore. Not really.
You do.
Like, no
but
one- yeah,
Not
no.
in the same way that
No,
you did.
yeah. Like if you don't know about my story,
Watch the video.
watch the video.
Story of overcoming.
Story of Overcoming, but
Yeah.
it talks about the process I went through of me being completely alone.
Yeah.
Me, losing people in my life who I had walked through. And so, if you don't know, I have 2 kids,
Mhm.
and I was married, and no one died or anything.
Right.
Let's preface that.
Yeah.
But, I sort of unexpectedly and not by choice had to walk through a season of coming here completely alone.
Right.
And my marriage fell apart. And if you don't know the story, watch the story.
Yep.
And so now I don't get to wake up in the same house as my kids, and I don't get to have a spouse to help support me and walk through life with me. And I lost half of my family, or my in-laws and all
Right.
all these people, and and so in the place, I lost church family, all these things, everything in my life was cut off, and so I walked to Nashville completely alone.
Yeah.
In this process, and so, but the beautiful thing about it was 2020 was the best worst year of my life. That's just the best way I could explain it.
Yep.
I was set free from bondage, from abuse, from brokenness, from pain, but I also lost, half of my half of my self.
Right.
When you become married, you become one, and
Yeah.
so half of me was cut off, and I've had to take the time, which I think this is a benefit of isolation, is it's time to heal, like you said.
Mhm.
And so I have used isolation to my benefit, or God has used isolation to heal me and to
Yeah.
bring me back to who I am, to bring me back to 100%. And so, I think isolation can sort of become a negative thing. And
Well, if you stay in it.
if you stay in it,
Right.
and if you don't, if you, like you said, isolation for you was protection.
Mm.
It was a protected time. It was a cave that wasn't for hiding, and it wasn't to shield yourself.
Right.
It wasn't to cover insecurities or shame or guilt, all these things, but it was for protection.
Mhm.
And the same has been for me as I've walked in isolation. And God has put me in isolation to walk in protection, to say, okay, like, Dakota, you need to heal, because if you just go walking around right now, you're just going to hurt people,
Right.
or you're going to hurt yourself even more, or you're just going to die. So, isolation has been it's been such a beautiful thing for me. And,
Right.
I think sometimes we can choose to be in isolation
Mhm.
if we don't walk in step with the plan that God has put us.
Right.
He's put isolation sometimes. Like it talks about Jesus withdrawing with the Father
Right.
to be with Him. Jesus was tempted by the Spirit, or not tempted by the Spirit, but led by the Spirit
Led by the
to go
To be
in-
tempted.
to be tempted
Mhm.
in the wilderness alone. With the tempter.
Yeah.
And so, I think a lot of times, like, God can put isolation in our lives, but if we choose the comfort route, it can actually go way longer and be way way more detrimental
Right.
to our future than instead of saying, okay, like, I'm gonna use isolation to understand, you, Lord. I'm gonna understand you more.
Right.
And that's what I've done is, you know, when you lose your wife and don't get to wake up in the same house as your kids, and when you lose friends, and when you lose church community, and when you lose family,
Right.
what else do you have? You know, I had nothing else but to be with the Father.
Yeah.
And so because I have been able to say, okay, Lord, I'm going to use this time to be with you, he's healed me. He set me free. He's given me new life. He's helped me restart. And so I don't, isolation has actually broken insecurity off of me instead of magnifying it because I've walked with him.
That's it.
And it's been a beautiful thing, honestly. Like, I could not be more thankful for it because it's been protection for me.
Yeah. And I think we would hope that that's more of people's story. And I know maybe this conversation will help people, change. Maybe if they're even going through isolation. What's interesting about isolation is that it doesn't take a pandemic for you to go through it.
Yeah.
Right. And like I just said, 2019.
Yeah.
There's no pandemic.
Yeah. It doesn't take a huge crazy thing for,
But you can, it could take one offense. It could take one bad,
Yeah.
You going through one bad that you were fired
Yeah.
or whatever the case is to put you in a state of isolation.
Yeah.
But isolation is temporary. It's supposed to be like, just like when you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
You don't go there to live there.
Yeah.
Right. That's not what
you go there to be healed.
Yes. You go to be healed. Now they take you away from the world. Right.
Yeah.
They put you in a sterile environment. And it's interesting, the fact that you said Jesus going into the wilderness, because I've used that over the past 2 years, really, like a million times.
Yeah.
When talking to people, we've mentioned a few of those things that I like. God has just continued to speak in my life and your life.
Yeah.
And going into the wilderness, there's something about that. Like we were led into this place.
Yeah.
Think about it. We both were led into this place.
Yes.
Out of circumstances that we didn't really want.
I had no control over. Yeah.
Yet God led us into a place of, wait a second, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Jesus walked through that as well. And he gave us an example of, this is what's going to happen, by the way. We're going to be led in this place. And then when we're tired.
Yeah. But it gives you a perfect example of what to do in isolation.
Yes. What
to
go
back to look back to the Father. The devil told him, throw yourself off of this mountain.
Yes.
And that's a spirit of suicide. That's like straight up. That's a spirit of suicide. And what did Jesus do? He quoted scripture and he pointed his eyes back to the Father. Pointed everything back to the Father. And so that's how he battled isolation.
That's the answer.
Yes.
And when you're going through isolation, Jesus already gave us this is how you do community.
The roadmap. Yeah.
This is how you do isolation.
Yeah.
Even when you're led into isolation by the Spirit.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
This is how you do isolation. And this is what's going to happen when you get tired and you get weary, right? You're going to want to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And
you get tested.
Yeah, and you get tested.
We've both been tested in this process.
But our it's just like the Israelites. We talked about it, right?
Yeah.
They were in the wilderness way longer than they needed to be.
Oh yeah.
Because they had Egypt in them, and it wasn't until they got that out of them, like you mentioned in episode 1. So they were able to walk into the promised land that was promised them.
Yeah.
But honestly, it was really in their hands.
Yes.
It was in their hands.
Yeah.
And there was comfort. Even the fact that they wanted to go back.
Well, they held on to things.
Right. They wanted to go back because it was walking out into your freedom is scary.
It was clear they knew what they were getting themselves into.
So a lot of times we don't know. I mean, Jesus was led to fasting. By the way, he fasted, and that's an interesting thing about, what are we giving up in a time of isolation?
Yeah.
What are the things that we're giving up, right? And really giving to the Lord. And he quoted the scripture at the end, and that just shows us that, how does Jesus quote the scripture to the devil? How? Because it's in him.
Yes. Because he
knew
it.
So when we're going through hardship, do we have something in us?
Yes.
To speak to that spirit that's coming against us, or that voice that's giving us doubt, or whatever temptation we have. What do we have in us?
Yeah.
So this is what to the throne is all about. To the throne is about going and meeting with the Father, and you can do that in many ways. And one of my favorite quotes, and it's about reading the Bible, And I think when you read the Bible, if you want to hear God's voice, read the Bible. If you want to hear his voice audibly, read it out loud.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? And
So
it's
good.
like he's speaking through us.
Yes.
It's a living word.
Everything we need is there.
And there's so much that we need in this life that
Yeah.
we don't realize is in our hands. And I mean, everyone can get
Yeah.
a Bible for free anywhere. I mean, it's like it's free.
Yeah.
It's freely for us.
Yeah.
And so, but we just need to get it in us. And that's the thing about going to the throne. It's like we need to get who he is, his spirit in us, so that when we go through these seasons of isolation, like we all have and we all will,
Yes.
right? We
Yeah.
all will. Even before Jesus went to the cross, he was in isolation.
Yes. He withdrew.
But yet he was there with the Father praying.
Yeah.
And still got tempted.
Yes.
And still was like, God, this is hard.
Yes.
But
take this cup from me.
Yes, but your will,
yes.
not mine. So going to the throne, for me at least, means to say, God, what is your will for my life?
Yeah.
And not, God, look at what I'm going through. This is so hard. Why?
Yeah.
Why am I going through this? It's like, God, what is your will? Because then it brings purpose to what I'm walking through.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I think the thing is, if you focus, what you focus on becomes more clear. Yeah. That's just how focus works. And when you focus on the Father, his will becomes more clear. Right. And what he says about you, it becomes more clear. Right. And his words to you and for you and his promises and his freedom and healing, they become more clear. But if we decide to look at ourselves, which culture loves to look at themselves. Yeah. The culture says, let me look at my emotions. Let me look at what is going to soothe me. Right. What's going to heal my body. What's going to it's this introspection thing of like, how can I make myself feel better? Right. And when you look at yourself, we are flawed. Mm-hmm. I'm flawed. When I look at myself, I will see flaws. Flaws will just become larger and larger. And because we're just human. Right. But when we look at the Father, he is perfect. Yeah. And when we go to the throne, we can see him clearly and his will for us. And so I think if you're in isolation or if you feel isolated, some key factors is, are you walking with people? Not only are you walking with people, are you walking with people that will encourage you? Yeah. Are you walking with people that will tell you the truth and be honest with you? In love. In love, right. In grace, and in truth, both at the same time. Mm-hmm. Are you walking with people that are going the same way as you? Because if not, you're either being dragged by people or you're dragging other people with you. That's good. And so I think ask yourself those questions to see if you're in community. Yeah. You know, if you go through something hard right now today, if something really bad happens to you, who are you going to call? Right. And who is that person for you? But if you're in isolation, know that your focus determines the health of who you are in isolation, and it will determine who you are after isolation. Right. Because if you focus on the Father, he will tell you. He will tell you everything. You know. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Come boldly to the throne of grace to obtain mercy and to find grace and help you in your time of need." When we look at him, we get grace and mercy for what we need. Right. We don't get insecurity or anxiety or depression. And so if you feel isolated, get some community around you. Ask God to give you some community and then go to the throne because everything you need is there. Yeah. That's good. That's a great way to end this podcast. I think this has been a good conversation because we will all, like I said before, we've all gone through it and we'll all go through it. Yeah. I believe every transition that we go through life, there's a level of isolation. Yes. There just is, you know? And I just see it as a reset. So no matter what happens to my life next week, next month, next year, next decade, whatever it's going to be, after walking through what I've walked through and also seeing how the world has walked through something as well. Yeah. You know, the world did just go through a transition. Yes. But it's, how are you coming out of that transition? Yeah. Right? And how you come out of it is determined by what you do during it. That's it. Yeah. And our example is Jesus. Jesus was led into the wilderness. Yes. Led into isolation. Yes. And how he came out of it was how we should come out of it. Mm-hmm. And we will be tempted. He came out of it and did ministry.
Yes, he did his
Came out of
calling.
it and did
And
miracles.
not just he did community too.
Yes.
Like he came
He
out of it.
walked with people.
He walked with people. He did his calling, right? That doesn't mean that, everyone was for him, right?
No.
We all know this.
Right.
But he kept like the will of the Father is the primary thing in his life. So we will go through transition, but no matter what transition we go through, it's how we go through it.
Yes.
Because how we go through it is how we'll come out of it.
Yes. Yeah. Isolation, so important. If you are isolated, reach out to somebody. You could reach out to us for all we care.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. Send us a DM, send us a text, whatever. But don't be alone, because it's a lie from the enemy that you need to be isolated, or that you should be isolated. You need to walk with people who believe in you. So thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. Thank you for going to the throne with us, and we will talk to you next time.
All right. See you guys.
Peace.